The winter of 1836 descended upon Lowell, Massachusetts with unforgiving intensity. Snow blanketed the industrial town, its white purity a stark contrast to the smoke billowing from the textile mills that lined the Merrimack River. In a modest clapboard house on Middlesex Street, Thomas and William Collins awoke simultaneously, both drenched in sweat despite the freezing temperatures. William sat upright, his breathing ragged, eyes wide with terror. Across the room, Thomas mirrored his twin's posture, the same haunted expression etched on his face. They were identical in every way. The same auburn hair, the same hazel eyes, the same constellation of freckles across their narrow noses. 22 years of shared existence had created a bond between them that defied explanation. "You saw it too," Thomas whispered, his voice barely audible above the howling wind outside their window. It wasn't a question. William nodded, swallowing hard. The general store, Mr. Whitman, the masked man with the silver-handled knife. "Tomorrow evening," Thomas continued, "just after sunset." Their shared dream had been vivid, terrifyingly precise. They had witnessed Edmund Whitman, the proprietor of Lowell's largest general store, counting the week's earnings by lamplight. They had seen the door open silently, felt the cold draft as a masked figure slipped inside. They had watched, helpless, as the stranger plunged a distinctive silver-handled knife into the shopkeeper's chest, stealing both his life and his money. "We have to warn him," William said, already reaching for his clothes. Thomas grabbed his brother's wrist. "And tell him what? That we dreamed he would be murdered? That we somehow saw his death before it happened? They'll think us mad, Will. Or worse, they'll think us guilty of planning the very crime we're trying to prevent." William sank back onto his bed, knowing his brother was right. In Lowell, a town built on rational industry and Puritan values, such claims would be met with suspicion at best, accusations of witchcraft at worst. The textile mills had brought progress and wealth, but the shadow of Salem's past still loomed over Massachusetts. "Then what do we do?" William asked, his voice hollow. "We stop it ourselves," Thomas replied, determination hardening his features. "We watch the store tomorrow evening. We intercept the killer before he enters." "And if we fail?" Thomas had no answer. The brothers spent the day in agitated anticipation, their work at the Merrimack Manufacturing Company suffering from their distraction. As loom fixers, their job required precision and focus, qualities impossible to maintain when counting the hours until a murder they had witnessed only in their dreams. As sunset approached, they positioned themselves across from Whitman's general store, concealed in the narrow alley between the cobbler's shop and the apothecary. Snow continued to fall, providing both cover and discomfort as they waited, breath-forming clouds in the frigid air. "Perhaps it won't happen," William whispered, hopeful despite the dread pooling in his stomach. "Perhaps it was just a nightmare." "It wasn't," Thomas replied, his eyes never leaving the store's entrance. "You know it wasn't." The lamplighter made his rounds, illuminating the streets with a warm glow that belied the tension of the moment. Inside the general store, Edmund Whitman could be seen through the window, counting coins at his counter, just as in their dream. Then they saw him, a man in a dark coat, his lower face obscured by a woolen scarf, approaching the store with purposeful strides. The silver handle of a knife glinted briefly in the lamplight as he drew it from his pocket. "Now!" Thomas hissed, and the brothers emerged from their hiding place, moving quickly to intercept the would-be killer. The man saw them coming, hesitated, then turned and fled down the street, disappearing into the maze of alleys that comprised Lowell's poorer district. The brothers gave chase but lost him in the darkness. "We stopped it," William gasped, bent over to catch his breath. "Mr. Whitman is safe." "For now," Thomas replied, a shadow crossing his face. "But we've only delayed the inevitable. The dream was too real, too detailed. This isn't over." They returned home in silence, relief mingling with uncertainty. They had prevented a crime that existed only in their dreams, a shared vision that defied rational explanation. As they prepared for bed, both knew sleep would bring no peace. "What if we dream again?" William asked, voicing the fear that gripped them both. "Then we'll know what's coming," Thomas answered. And we'll stop that too. But neither twin was prepared for the dream that awaited them that night, a vision more vivid and horrifying than the first, and one that would test not only their courage, but the very fabric of their reality. Check if you're already subscribed to this channel. This story of extraordinary twins with unique abilities will take you through a riveting journey of mystery, courage, and the unbreakable bonds of family. Subscribe now to never miss an episode of these historical tales that challenge our understanding of the human mind. Dawn broke over Lowell with a pale, uncertain light. Thomas and William sat at their small kitchen table, untouched cups of coffee growing cold before them. Their faces, mirror images of exhaustion, bore the weight of another shared nightmare. "The Harrington woman," William murmured, rubbing his temples. "In her own home." "Strangled with a silk scarf," Thomas added, his voice hollow. "Tonight." Elizabeth Harrington was a widow who lived alone in a handsome house near the canal. Her husband, a former mill owner, had left her comfortably wealthy upon his death 3 years prior. In their dream, the twins had watched as a figure climbed through her bedroom window and silenced her cries with a beautiful silk scarf, blue with silver embroidery, that had been a gift from her late husband. "We have to tell someone," William insisted. "Sheriff Collins, perhaps." Thomas shook his head. "And risk being locked up as lunatics? Or worse, as accomplices? You know how this looks, Will. 2 factory workers somehow knowing the details of crimes before they happen." "Then what do you suggest?" "We can't watch every potential victim in Lowell." Thomas was silent for a long moment. "We need proof. Evidence that our dreams are real. If we stop this attack on Mrs. Harrington and capture the assailant, perhaps then someone will believe us." They spent the day planning their intervention, requesting leave from the mill under the pretense of illness. As night fell, they positioned themselves in the garden of the Harrington house, concealed behind the dormant rose bushes that lined the property. The hours passed with excruciating slowness, the cold seeping into their bones as they waited, watching the upstairs windows for any sign of an intruder. "There," William whispered suddenly, pointing to a shadow moving along the wall of the house. A figure was scaling the trellis that led to the second floor, moving with the confidence of someone who had planned this approach carefully. The brothers exchanged a glance, then moved silently toward the house. William reached the trellis first, grabbing the ankle of the climber just as he reached the windowsill. There was a momentary struggle, then the intruder lost his grip and fell, landing heavily in the snow beside them. Thomas was on him instantly, pinning him down while William ran to the front door, pounding urgently to wake Mrs. Harrington. The would-be assailant was a young man, perhaps no older than the twins themselves. His face was obscured by a woolen mask, but when Thomas pulled it away, he was startled to recognize Peter Walsh, a fellow worker from the Merrimack Mill. "Walsh!" Thomas exclaimed, shocked to find someone he knew beneath the mask. "Let me go, Collins," Walsh snarled, struggling against Thomas's grip. "This is none of your affair." "You were going to kill her," Thomas said, tightening his hold. "Kill?" Walsh looked genuinely confused. "I wasn't going to kill anyone. I was just after the silver she keeps in her jewelry box. How did you know I would be here tonight?" Thomas had no chance to respond as the front door opened, spilling light onto the snow-covered garden. Mrs. Harrington stood there, wrapped in a dressing gown, with William at her side. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, then gasped when she saw Walsh pinned to the ground. "Peter Walsh? You were trying to rob me?" The sheriff arrived shortly thereafter, alerted by a neighbor who had heard the commotion. Walsh was arrested, all the while protesting that he had only intended to steal, not to harm. "How did you boys know he would be here tonight?" Sheriff Collins asked, eyeing the twins with a mixture of gratitude and suspicion. "We observed him watching the house earlier," Thomas lied smoothly. "Thought his behavior seemed suspicious." The sheriff seemed satisfied with this explanation, thanking them for their vigilance. Mrs. Harrington was effusive in her gratitude, insisting on rewarding them despite their protests. As they walked home through the silent streets of Lowell, William turned to his brother. "Walsh wasn't going to kill her. He didn't have a scarf. Our dream was wrong. Or incomplete, Thomas replied thoughtfully. We saw the attack, but perhaps not the full truth of it. And there's something else that troubles me. What? In our dream, did you notice anything unusual about the intruder's hands? William frowned, trying to recall the details of the nightmare. He wore gloves. Yes, but when we caught Walsh, his hands were bare. They walked in silence, contemplating this discrepancy. Neither wanted to acknowledge the implication that perhaps Walsh had not been the figure from their dream at all, that perhaps the real danger to Mrs. Harrington still lurked in the shadows of Lowell. That night they slept fitfully, each dreading what new visions might come. They were not disappointed. The Lowell Courier's headline on Thursday morning read, "Attempted burglary foiled by quick-thinking brothers." The story praised the twins' vigilance, describing them as exemplary citizens who had protected a vulnerable widow. What the newspaper failed to mention was that the Collins brothers had been nowhere near Mrs. Harrington's house when they decided to watch it that night, or that the blue silk scarf with silver embroidery, the murder weapon from their dream, had been found in Peter Walsh's coat pocket when he was searched at the jail. He was going to kill her, William whispered, the newspaper trembling in his hands. Just as we saw. They sat in the small reading room of the Lowell Mechanics Association, a place where mill workers could educate themselves during their precious free hours. Thomas had insisted they come here to research other instances of prophetic dreams or unexplained phenomena, seeking some context for their disturbing new ability. Walsh denied it, Thomas replied, keeping his voice low to avoid being overheard. He seemed genuinely confused when I accused him of attempted murder. He's a thief and a liar. Of course he would deny it. Thomas wasn't convinced. Something about Walsh's reaction had seemed authentic. But if not Walsh, then who had they seen in their dream? And what did it mean that they had prevented not only a robbery, but an apparent murder? There's another possibility, Thomas said carefully, that our dreams aren't showing us the future at all, that they're somehow causing it. William stared at his brother, aghast. That's madness. How could our dreams make someone commit a crime? I don't know, but consider. We dream of a man with a silver knife, and the next day a man appears with exactly such a weapon. We dream of a blue silk scarf used as a garrote, and such a scarf appears in Walsh's pocket. Coincidence, William insisted, though his voice lacked conviction. Twice? And with such specific details? They fell silent as another patron entered the reading room. The man, Dr. Elias Lambert, the town physician, nodded politely to them before selecting a book from the shelves. The twins had encountered him professionally only once, when Thomas had suffered a laceration at the mill requiring stitches. Perhaps we should consult someone, William suggested, once Lambert had moved to a distant table. A man of science or medicine. Thomas scoffed. And be labeled as lunatics? Or worse, practitioners of some form of witchcraft? This is still Massachusetts, Will. Then what? We continue to have these dreams, try to prevent the crimes, and hope no one questions how we always happen to be in the right place at the right time. Before Thomas could respond, they were interrupted by Dr. Lambert, who had apparently overheard their conversation. Pardon my intrusion, the physician said, approaching their table. But did I hear you discussing prophetic dreams? The twins exchanged alarmed glances. It's a topic that fascinates me, Lambert continued, seemingly oblivious to their discomfort. I've been collecting accounts of such phenomena for a personal study. The human mind remains largely unmapped territory, particularly in the realm of sleep and dreams. It was merely a philosophical discussion, Thomas said quickly, inspired by our reading. Lambert smiled, though his keen eyes suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. Of course, though I would note that throughout history, there have been documented cases of individuals experiencing what appeared to be prophetic visions. Most can be explained by coincidence or subconscious observation, but some defy conventional explanation. He placed a card on their table. If you ever wish to discuss the topic further, purely academically, of course, my door is always open to inquiring minds. After the doctor left, William picked up the card. "Perhaps we should talk to him." "Not yet," Thomas replied, pocketing the card nonetheless. "Not until we understand more ourselves." That night, they dreamed again. This time, they saw the inside of the Lowell Bank. They watched as the night watchman made his rounds, observed as a group of masked men, 4 in total, overpowered him and used explosives to open the vault. They saw one man shoot the watchman when he tried to reach for his whistle, saw the blood pool on the marble floor. The men's faces were obscured, but there was something familiar about one of them, something in his posture, the way he moved. "Tomorrow night," William said when they awoke. "The bank robbery happens tomorrow night." "And we're going to stop it," Thomas replied, already formulating a plan. "But this time, we need help." They spent the day in careful preparation, watching the bank from different angles, noting the routine of the guards and the timing of police patrols. By evening, they had positioned themselves in the alley beside the bank, waiting for the robbers to appear. "What if we're wrong again?" William asked, his breath forming clouds in the cold night air. "What if we dream but can't change the outcome?" Thomas gripped his brother's shoulder. "Then at least we tried. But I believe we can change what we see. I believe that's why we're seeing it at all." The clock struck midnight, and right on schedule, a covered wagon pulled up beside the bank. 4 men, their faces concealed by bandanas, emerged and moved toward the side entrance. "Now," Thomas whispered. William lifted the whistle they had borrowed from a friendly constable and blew a sharp, piercing note that cut through the quiet night. Almost immediately, responding whistles sounded from several directions as the police officers they had alerted converged on the bank. The would-be robbers froze, then scattered. 3 ran toward the wagon, while the 4th, the one who had seemed familiar in the dream, headed down the alley where the twins were hidden. Thomas stepped out to block his path, and the man skidded to a halt, momentarily surprised. In that instant of hesitation, William tackled him from behind, bringing him to the ground with a thud. The man fought fiercely, landing a solid blow to William's jaw before Thomas could restrain him. When they finally pulled the bandana from his face, they were shocked to see Peter Walsh, the same man who had been arrested for the attempted robbery of Mrs. Harrington's home. "Walsh?" Thomas exclaimed. "How are you not in jail?" Walsh spat blood onto the snow. "Released yesterday. Insufficient evidence. The old woman couldn't identify me in the dark, and that scarf wasn't hers after all. But how did you know about tonight? How are you always there?" Before either twin could respond, the police arrived, taking Walsh into custody once more. The other robbers had escaped, but the attempted bank heist had been foiled. Sheriff Collins was less accepting of coincidence this time. "Twice now you boys have prevented crimes before they happened," he said, studying them with narrow eyes. "That strains credulity." "We overheard plans at the mill," Thomas lied. "Walsh isn't as careful as he thinks." The sheriff clearly didn't believe them, but had no evidence to suggest anything more nefarious than remarkable intuition. When they were finally allowed to return home, William collapsed onto his bed, touching his bruised jaw tenderly. "Do you realize what this means?" he said quietly. "Walsh was released, just as you suspected he wasn't the man from our first dream. But then he appeared in our second dream, and this time it really was him." Thomas nodded, his expression troubled. "Which means our dreams show us what will happen, but not always who will make it happen." "Or perhaps," William suggested, his voice dropping to a whisper, "perhaps the dream itself chooses the perpetrator. Perhaps by dreaming, we're somehow selecting who will commit these crimes." The thought hung between them, terrible in its implications. If their dreams weren't just predicting crimes but somehow influencing them, were they responsible for the very acts they were trying to prevent? If only someone out there could tell me what's happening. Have you ever felt you knew something was going to happen before it did? Leave a comment saying, "I've sensed it too," if you've ever experienced a premonition that came true. Dr. Elias Lambert's office smelled of carbolic acid and old books. The physician listened intently as the twins related their experiences, his expression remaining neutral save for the occasional widening of his eyes at particularly compelling details. They had decided to confide in him after the bank incident, driven by a growing fear that their dreams were not merely prophetic, but potentially causative. "Fascinating," Lambert said when they had finished their account. "Truly remarkable. And you're certain these events occur exactly as you dreamed them?" "With variations," Thomas clarified. "Sometimes we see the crime, but not the criminal's face. Sometimes we see details that later prove significant, though we don't understand them at the time." "And always you both dream the same thing on the same night?" The twins nodded in unison. Lambert leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers beneath his chin. "There are documented cases of twins experiencing unusual mental connections. The bond between identical siblings has long fascinated medical science, but what you describe goes beyond anything in the literature." "Are we causing these events somehow?" William asked, voicing the fear that had kept both brothers awake for nights. "By dreaming them? Are we making them happen?" "I think not," Lambert replied after a thoughtful pause. "From what you've described, your interventions have prevented the worst outcomes of these crimes. Had you truly been causing them, I suspect your interference would have proven ineffective." "Then why us?" Thomas demanded. "Why are we seeing these things?" Lambert rose from his desk and crossed to a bookshelf, selecting a thick volume bound in faded leather. "There is a theory," he said, leafing through the pages, "proposed by certain philosophers that time is not a river flowing in one direction, but rather a vast ocean. All moments, past, present, and future, exist simultaneously, though we perceive only a small portion." He found the page he was seeking and placed the open book before them. The illustration showed concentric circles, with arrows pointing in multiple directions. Some sensitive individuals may occasionally glimpse other parts of this ocean, futures that have not yet come to pass in our perception. Most such glimpses are forgotten upon waking or dismissed as mere dreams. But in rare cases, particularly where there exists a strong connection between two minds. "Like twins," William interjected. "Precisely. In such cases, these glimpses may be retained and shared. I believe you are experiencing something akin to this, a shared sensitivity to potential futures, particularly those involving violence or harm." The explanation was both comforting and disturbing. If Lambert was right, they weren't causing these events but merely perceiving them in advance. Yet this raised an equally troubling question. "If what we see is the future," Thomas said slowly, "then by changing it, are we altering the natural course of events? Playing God in a sense?" Lambert smiled gently. "If God granted you this ability, perhaps he intends for you to use it. Consider the lives you've saved already." The twins left the doctor's office with mixed emotions. His theory provided a framework for understanding their experiences, but it offered little guidance on how to proceed. Were they obligated to act on every dream? What if they failed to prevent a crime they had foreseen? That night, for the first time in days, they did not dream of crime or violence. Instead, both experienced a peaceful, dreamless sleep, a brief respite from the burden of their unwanted gift. The reprieve was short-lived. 3 nights later, they dreamed of fire. They saw the Merrimack Mill, their workplace, engulfed in flames. They watched as panicked workers rushed toward blocked exits, heard the screams of those trapped on upper floors. In the dream, they saw the face of Harold Whitcomb, the night supervisor, his expression a mask of terror as the flames reached him. "Sunday night," William said upon waking. "The mill burns on Sunday night." Thomas nodded grimly. "With Whitcomb and at least a dozen others trapped inside." "We have to warn someone. This is too big for us to handle alone." Thomas considered this. Unlike the previous crimes, a fire at the mill would affect dozens, perhaps hundreds of lives. The risk of being disbelieved or even accused was outweighed by the potential tragedy. "We'll go to Sheriff Collins," he decided. "But we need a plausible explanation for our concern." They presented themselves at the sheriff's office that morning, claiming to have overheard suspicious conversation about a planned act of sabotage at the mill. Labor tensions had been high in Lowell for months, With workers organizing for better conditions and owners resisting their demands, the idea of sabotage was not implausible. Sheriff Collins listened skeptically. "And you say this fire is planned for Sunday night? That's oddly specific. Who exactly did you overhear?" "We couldn't see their faces," William improvised. "They were speaking in the alley behind Donovan's tavern, but they mentioned Whitcomb by name, said he would be the first to burn." "That's a serious accusation," the sheriff replied. "Starting a fire at the mill would be more than mischief. It would be murder. I'll need more than an overheard conversation to act on this." The twins left the sheriff's office disheartened, but not defeated. If official channels wouldn't help, they would need to take matters into their own hands once again. "We'll warn Whitcomb directly," Thomas decided. "And we'll be at the mill on Sunday night to evacuate as many people as we can." "And if no one believes us?" William asked. Thomas's expression hardened. "Then we'll prove them wrong. One way or another, we're going to prevent this fire." Sunday arrived with an ominous stillness. Snow had fallen during the night, transforming Lowell into a pristine white landscape that belied the danger the twins knew was coming. They had spent the intervening days in careful preparation, mapping the mill's exits, identifying potential fire hazards, even purchasing buckets and rope that might prove useful in an evacuation. Their warnings to Whitcomb had been met with skepticism bordering on hostility. The night supervisor, a stern man known for his strict adherence to mill regulations, had accused them of trying to disrupt operations or extract concessions for the Workers' Association. "If I hear one more word of this nonsense," he had threatened, "you'll both be looking for new employment come Monday morning." Undeterred, the twins positioned themselves near the mill as darkness fell, watching as the night shift workers filed inside and the massive water wheel began its relentless turning. The Merrimack Mill operated around the clock, its machines producing cotton textiles that would be shipped throughout the country. "We should split up," Thomas suggested, his breath visible in the cold air. "I'll take the north side, you take the south. If you see anything suspicious, anything at all, use the whistle." William nodded, clutching the small metal whistle they had purchased for this purpose. "And if the fire starts despite our presence? Then we get as many people out as possible." They separated, each taking position at opposite ends of the mill complex. The hours passed with excruciating slowness, the temperature dropping steadily as midnight approached. William stamped his feet to maintain circulation, wondering if perhaps this time their dream had been wrong, or if their preparation had somehow prevented the conditions that would lead to fire. Just after midnight, he noticed a figure moving furtively along the canal that powered the mill's water wheel. The person, a man, judging by his build, carried something in his arms. As he drew closer to the mill, William recognized the distinctive shape of a kerosene container. He raised the whistle to his lips and blew 3 sharp blasts, the signal he and Thomas had agreed would indicate imminent danger. Then he began running toward the suspicious figure, shouting to attract attention from the mill guards. The man turned at the commotion, saw William approaching, and made a split-second decision. Rather than fleeing, he hurled the container toward the base of the mill, where it shattered against the wooden wall. The liquid contents splashed across the timbers, and before William could reach him, the man struck a match and tossed it into the spreading puddle. Flames erupted instantly, climbing the wall with terrifying speed. The arsonist fled, disappearing into the maze of alleyways that surrounded the industrial district. William's priority immediately shifted from pursuit to evacuation. He ran to the nearest entrance, shouting warnings to the guards who had already noticed the growing blaze. Inside, workers were beginning to realize something was wrong, moving toward exits with increasing urgency. "Fire! Everyone out!" William called, directing people toward the doors furthest from the flames. "Don't stop for your belongings!" Across the complex, Thomas had heard the whistle and seen the flames beginning to lick at the mill's exterior. He rushed to the main entrance, where a crowd of workers was already forming, pushing against doors that opened inward and were becoming jammed by the press of bodies. "Step back!" he shouted above the growing panic. "Let the doors open!" The crowd reluctantly gave space, allowing the doors to swing inward. Thomas positioned himself at the entrance, helping to maintain order as workers streamed past him into the night air. "Is anyone still inside?" he asked each person who passed. Most shook their heads or didn't respond, too focused on their own escape. But one young woman, her face streaked with soot, grabbed his arm. "Whitcomb and some others," she gasped. "Upper floor, eastern corner. The stairs are blocked." Thomas's heart sank. This was exactly what they had seen in their dream, Whitcomb and others trapped as the flames reached them. Despite their preparations, despite their warnings, the worst aspects of their vision were coming to pass. He spotted William across the courtyard, directing the last of the workers from the southern entrance. Catching his twin's eye, he pointed upward, toward the eastern corner of the mill where smoke was now billowing from the windows. William understood immediately. They had practiced this scenario in their minds a dozen times since the dream. He ran to collect the rope they had stashed nearby, while Thomas retrieved the ladder they had identified as potentially useful. By the time they reached the eastern wall, the fire had spread to engulf nearly half the mill. The heat was intense, forcing them to keep their distance as they set up the ladder. It would reach only to the second floor, well short of where Whitcomb and the others were trapped, but it was a start. "I'll go up," William said, tying the rope around his waist. "You anchor me." Thomas wanted to protest, wanted to be the one to face the danger, but there was no time for argument. He secured the other end of the rope around a sturdy tree, creating a lifeline for his brother. William climbed the ladder quickly, disappearing through a second-floor window into the smoke-filled mill. Minutes passed, feeling like hours to Thomas as he maintained his grip on the rope, feeling each tug and movement from his brother inside the burning building. Finally, a face appeared at an upper window, not William's, but Harold Whitcomb's. The night supervisor looked terrified, coughing violently as he leaned out into the marginally clearer air. "Help!" he called, spotting Thomas below. "The stairs are gone!" "My brother's coming up through the inside," Thomas shouted back. "How many are with you?" "5! We're in the accounting office!" Thomas felt the rope go slack for a moment, then taut again. There was movement at the window beside Whitcomb, and William appeared, his face blackened by smoke. "Lower the rope," William called down. "We'll send them down one at a time." Thomas untied his end of the rope, keeping a firm grip as William secured it to something inside. Then, slowly, the first survivor began descending, a young clerk who moved awkwardly but safely reached the ground. One by one, the trapped workers made their way down the rope, each looking more exhausted and smoke-affected than the last. Whitcomb was the fifth, leaving only William still inside the burning mill. "Come on!" Thomas shouted up to his brother. "The whole thing's going to collapse!" William appeared at the window, rope in hand, but before he could begin his descent, there was a terrible groaning sound from within the building. The roof was giving way, sending a cascade of burning timbers onto the upper floors. William disappeared from view as part of the wall collapsed. Thomas watched in horror, calling his brother's name, but there was no response. Then, miraculously, a figure emerged from a different window, jumped to catch an overhanging beam, and swung down to land heavily on a pile of snow. William rolled, clearly in pain, but alive. Thomas rushed to his side, helping him away from the collapsing building just as the entire eastern wall gave way, sending a shower of sparks into the night sky. "Are you hurt?" Thomas demanded, examining his brother for injuries. William grimaced, holding his left arm awkwardly. "Broken, I think. But I'm alive." He looked back at the mill, now fully engulfed in flames despite the efforts of the hastily organized bucket brigade. "We didn't stop it, Tom." "We saved lives," Thomas corrected him. "Whitcomb and the others would have died without us. The dream showed us what would happen, and we changed it." As dawn broke over Lowell, the Merrimack Mill was reduced to smoldering ruins. The fire brigade had prevented the flames from spreading to adjacent buildings, but the mill itself was a total loss. Remarkably, there had been no fatalities, a fact that many were already describing as miraculous given the speed and intensity of the blaze. The twins sat on a bench across from the destruction, William's arm now properly splinted by Dr. Lambert, who had arrived to tend the injured. The physician had examined both brothers carefully, concerned about smoke inhalation, but had declared them remarkably unscathed given their heroism, You knew, Whitcomb said, approaching them with a humbled expression. You tried to warn me and I didn't listen. How did you know? Thomas and William exchanged glances. Call it a feeling, Thomas replied. Or intuition. Whitcomb shook his head, clearly not satisfied with this explanation but too grateful to press further. Whatever it was, you saved our lives. The company won't forget that. As the supervisor walked away, William turned to his brother. Do you think it's over now? The dreams? Thomas looked out at the still smoking ruins of the mill. No, he said quietly. I think it's only beginning. Spring arrived in Lowell, bringing with it new growth and renewal. The burned shell of the Merrimack Mill was being cleared to make way for a new, larger facility, its construction providing employment for many who had been displaced by the fire. Among them were Thomas and William Collins, now employed as supervisors rather than ordinary workers, a promotion granted in recognition of their actions on that fateful night. Their reputation had transformed in the months following the fire. Once simply unremarkable twin brothers, they were now regarded with a mixture of respect and unease. Their uncanny ability to be in the right place at the right time had not gone unnoticed, particularly after they prevented a brawl at Donovan's Tavern before it could turn deadly, another incident foreseen in their shared dreams. They call us the Watchful Brothers now, William remarked one evening as they walked home from the construction site. His arm, healed but still occasionally painful, was tucked into his coat against the spring chill. I heard Reverend Simmons mention us in his sermon last Sunday. Thomas grimaced. As examples of divine providence, no doubt. Is that so far from the truth? What would you call our dreams if not some form of providence? They had continued to experience shared visions throughout the winter and into spring, though with decreasing frequency. Always, the dreams showed moments of danger or violence, and always the brothers felt compelled to intervene. They had prevented robberies, stopped assaults, even warned a family to evacuate their home the night before a chimney fire would have claimed their lives. Dr. Lambert had continued to study their case with growing fascination, documenting each incident and corresponding dream with scientific precision. His theory had evolved to include what he called sympathetic resonance, the idea that the twins' identical physiologies created a unique channel through which they could perceive imminent threats to the social order. It's as though you are tuning forks, he had explained during one of their regular meetings. When danger approaches, you vibrate in harmony with it, producing these prophetic visions. Whether Lambert's theory was correct or merely pseudoscientific speculation, the reality of their gift, or curse, was undeniable. They had saved lives, prevented suffering, and in the process, gained a peculiar form of local celebrity. That evening, as they prepared for bed in the small but comfortable house they had recently purchased with their improved wages, William posed the question that had been increasingly on both their minds. Have you considered that our responsibility might extend beyond Lowell? That perhaps we're meant to use this ability more broadly? Thomas looked up sharply. What are you suggesting? That we become traveling vigilantes, following our dreams from town to town? Not vigilantes, but perhaps consultants of a sort. There are police departments in Boston, New York, Philadelphia, all places where our gift could save lives. And how would we explain ourselves? Good morning, Chief Constable, we had a dream about a murder in your jurisdiction. We'd be dismissed as lunatics or worse, suspected of involvement. William sighed, acknowledging the practical difficulties. Then what? We simply continue as we are, living ordinary lives except when our dreams compel us to act? Is that so terrible? We have good positions, respect in the community, enough income to live comfortably. Most men would consider themselves fortunate. But most men haven't been given what we have. Most men can't see what's coming before it happens. They fell silent, each contemplating the weight of the gift they had never asked for but could not ignore. Outside their window, the streets of Lowell were quiet, the mill bells silent until morning would summon workers to their stations once more. I think, Thomas said finally, that we were given this ability for a reason. Not to become renowned or wealthy, but to protect this community, our home. Perhaps that's enough. William nodded slowly. Perhaps. for now at least. That night, they dreamed again, not of Lowell, but of Boston. They saw the crowded streets of the capital, the elegant townhouses of Beacon Hill, the bustling commerce of the harbor. And they saw a man in an expensive coat enter a bank, a concealed derringer in his pocket, and murder in his heart. When they awoke, they looked at each other with the familiar mix of dread and determination that had become the hallmark of their mornings after such dreams. "Boston," William said. "The Merchants' Bank on State Street." "Tomorrow," Thomas added. "Or perhaps the day after." The light suggested morning. They dressed in silence, each knowing what needed to be done but reluctant to voice it. Finally, Thomas spoke the words that would alter their lives irrevocably. "We should pack. The morning coach leaves for Boston at 8. William nodded. "Dr. Lambert should be informed. He'll want to continue his observations. And our positions at the mill? We'll request a leave of absence. Family matters in Boston." They moved with the efficiency of men accustomed to responding to crisis, gathering only what was necessary for a journey of uncertain duration. By sunrise, they were ready, their small traveling cases packed and waiting by the door. As they locked their home and prepared to depart, Thomas paused, looking back at the modest house that represented everything they had worked for: stability, respectability, a place in the community. "We may not be coming back," he said quietly. "At least, not to the lives we knew." William placed a hand on his brother's shoulder. "We haven't been living the lives we knew since that first dream about Whitman's store. This is simply the next step in a journey that began months ago." Thomas nodded, accepting the truth of his twins' words. Their path had been set the moment they had shared that first prophetic dream. Whether they were instruments of providence or victims of some inexplicable phenomenon, they could not ignore the responsibility that came with their gift. As they walked toward the coach station, the early light painting Lowell in soft gold, they moved in perfect synchronicity, mirror images with a shared purpose, bound by blood and vision, to a destiny neither had chosen, but both had embraced. The inhabitants of Boston, unknowing, went about their morning routines, oblivious to the approaching arrival of two unremarkable-looking young men whose dreams would change their lives forever. In Lowell, they would be remembered as the twins who somehow always knew when danger threatened. In Boston, they would become something else entirely, a legend that would grow with each crime prevented, each disaster averted, each life saved by men who saw tomorrow's tragedies today. If you've watched this far, it's because you liked this story. Leave a comment saying, "I've watched this far, so I can get to know you and see who really enjoys the stories here on the channel." Don't forget to like this video and share it with someone who appreciates a good historical tale. And make sure you're subscribed to see where the Collins twins' journey takes them next. The coach to Boston rattled over the uneven spring roads, carrying the Collins brothers toward a future neither could fully envision. They sat in silence for much of the journey, watching the Massachusetts countryside transform from the industrial landscape of Lowell to rolling farmland and eventually to the approaching outskirts of Boston. "Do you ever wonder," William said finally, breaking the contemplative silence, "if we're merely delaying the inevitable? If these crimes we prevent are somehow destined to occur, just in different forms?" Thomas considered the question, watching a flock of birds wheel across the sky. "I've thought about that, but I don't believe in that kind of destiny. Our dreams show us possibilities, not certainties. What matters is what we choose to do with that knowledge." As Boston came into view, its church spires and brick buildings rising against the harbor, both brothers felt a strange mixture of apprehension and purpose. They had only a day, perhaps two, to locate the Merchants' Bank and prevent the crime they had foreseen. "We should find lodging near State Street," Thomas suggested as the coach entered the city proper. "The closer we are to the bank, the better our chances." They secured rooms at a modest boarding house within walking distance of the financial district. The landlady, a widow named Mrs. Prescott, raised her eyebrows at their identical faces, but asked no questions beyond confirming they could pay in advance. That evening, they walked the route to the Merchants' Bank, familiarizing themselves with the streets and identifying potential observation points. Boston was larger and more crowded than Lowell, with a constant flow of people that would make surveillance more challenging. We'll need to arrive early, William noted as they studied the bank's facade. Position ourselves on opposite sides of the entrance. Thomas nodded, his eyes tracking the movements of bank employees closing up for the day. And hope we recognize him from our dream. The face wasn't clear. The coat was distinctive, dark blue with silver buttons, and he walked with a slight limp. They returned to their lodging and slept fitfully, neither experiencing any new dreams to clarify what awaited them. Morning found them alert but anxious, positioned as planned on either side of the bank's entrance before the doors had even opened for business. Hours passed. Customers came and went, merchants, ship captains, gentlemen of means, but none matched the figure from their dream. By midday, both brothers were beginning to wonder if they had misinterpreted the timing. Then William saw him, a man approaching from the direction of the harbor, wearing a dark blue coat with distinctive silver buttons. He walked with the same slight limp they had observed in their dream, and his expression carried the determined focus of someone about to commit a desperate act. William caught Thomas's eye across the street and nodded slightly. Thomas responded by moving closer to the bank entrance, positioning himself to intercept the man if necessary. The would-be assailant paused briefly before the bank, adjusting something inside his coat, the derringer from their dream, Thomas assumed. Then he straightened his posture and ascended the steps to the entrance. Thomas moved simultaneously, timing his approach to reach the door just as the man did. They collided, a seemingly accidental encounter that allowed Thomas to grasp the man's arm while appearing to steady himself. "My apologies, sir," Thomas said loudly, maintaining his grip on the arm where he could feel the outline of a concealed weapon. "How clumsy of me." The man tried to pull away, his face contorting with anger and alarm. "Release me at once." William appeared beside them, effectively blocking the man's retreat. "Is there a problem, brother?" "No problem," Thomas replied evenly, "though I believe this gentleman may have dropped something." He reached into the man's coat and extracted the derringer, holding it visible just long enough for a bank guard to notice. What followed happened quickly: the guard's intervention, the man's attempt to flee, his subsequent restraint, and the summoning of police. The brothers provided statements, explaining that they had noticed the man behaving suspiciously and had acted on instinct. "Remarkable timing," commented the police sergeant who took their report. "If you hadn't intervened, we might be investigating a robbery or worse." "We were fortunate," Thomas replied, exchanging a glance with William. Later, as they walked back to their boarding house, William asked the question that had been forming since their arrival in Boston. "What now? Do we stay? Wait for another dream to guide us?" Thomas stopped, looking out over the harbor where ships from around the world unloaded their cargoes. "I think our dreams will follow us wherever we go. The question is whether we continue to act on them." "Could we do otherwise?" William responded. "Knowing what might happen and choosing to do nothing, I'm not sure I could live with that." Thomas nodded slowly. "Then perhaps this is our purpose. Not the lives we planned in Lowell, but something else entirely. Something few would understand but many might benefit from." They continued walking, their identical silhouettes merging with the lengthening shadows of late afternoon. Whether their gift was divine providence or some quirk of their shared minds, they had accepted the responsibility it entailed. The Collins twins would continue to dream of dangers yet to come, and in doing so, they would change the course of events that most believed were fixed and immutable. In time, their reputation would grow, first in Boston, then beyond. They would never seek fame for their unusual ability, preferring to work quietly, intervening only when necessary. But stories would spread nonetheless, tales of the identical brothers who seemed to appear whenever danger threatened, who knew things they couldn't possibly know. Some would call them guardian angels. Others would suspect more sinister powers at work. But Thomas and William Collins were neither angels nor demons, just two men bound by blood and dreams, doing what they could to lighten the burden of knowing what lay ahead. And in the years that followed, many lives would be saved by those who had been granted the strange gift of seeing tomorrow's tragedies today.